Imagine standing on frozen lake ice at 4 in the morning, January 1910, somewhere in northern Michigan's timber country. The temperature is 15 degrees below zero. Your hands are wrapping heavy chain around a pyramid of white pine logs, stacked 20 feet high on a massive sled. 40 tons of timber, maybe more. The ice beneath your boots is 2 feet thick enough, the road boss said. You can't see through the snowpack to know for sure. The lake is silent except for the creak of the runners and the occasional groan from deep below. A newspaper in Saginaw would later report the incident in 2 sentences. Logging sled breaks through ice on Twin Lake. 3 men and team lost. By spring thaw, the company logged the deaths as drowning, cheaper than admitting the weight. The forest needed to move. Winter was the only way to move it, and you were the one who made it happen. Before we continue, if you believe these men deserve to be remembered, that their sacrifice built the world we live in today, hit that subscribe button, only if you truly mean it. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. It's fascinating to see how far these forgotten histories reach. By late November 1906, you arrive at a timber camp in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, 60 miles from the nearest town. 200 men, no roads out until April. The camp sits in a clearing, hacked from white pine forest, so thick you can't see 50 yards in any direction. Bunkhouses are rough log structures, 20 men to a room, sleeping in double bunks with straw mattresses that haven't been changed since last season. The smell hits you first: wet wool, wood smoke, unwashed bodies, tobacco spit frozen in corners. You sleep shoulder to shoulder with strangers: Swedes, Finns, French Canadians, drifters from down south. Most don't speak English. All of them owe the company store before they've swung their first axe. You eat at long tables in a separate building. Beans, salt pork, bread, coffee thick as mud. You eat fast, you eat heavy, because none of it matters once the sun comes up. The camp boss stands at the door every morning with a clipboard, checking names. If you're sick, you don't get paid. If you're hurt, you get a ticket to the train, if you can walk that far. The company owns the land, the tools, the food, the bunks. They own you too for the length of the contract. Winter contracts, October to March, the big push. Outside, the forest is endless. White pine, Norway pine, hemlock. Trees that took 300 years to grow. The lumber boom is feeding Chicago's rebuilding after the fire. Detroit's factories, railroads pushing west. Demand is infinite. Supply is whatever you can cut and move before spring. And moving it, that's the gamble. Rivers are frozen solid. No barges. Roads don't exist out here, not real ones. What you have is snow and ice and desperation. Why winter? Because the logs are too heavy to move any other way. In summer, you'd need rail lines, and rail lines cost money the companies won't spend on temporary camps. In winter, you build ice roads, highways made of frozen water, packed snow and prayer. The road crews start in December, as soon as the frost locks in. They're out every night with water tanks and sprinkler sleds, laying down thin sheets of water that freeze into glass-smooth surfaces. A good ice road can handle incredible weight if the temperature holds. If it doesn't, men die. You watch them work. The road boss is a Finn named Koskinen, 30 years old, missing 2 fingers from a cable accident. He carries a thermometer in his coat pocket and checks it obsessively. Too warm, the ice melts and the road turns to slush. Too cold, the water won't spread evenly, and you get ruts that will snap a sled in half. The window is narrow. 20 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. He's out there from dusk until 3 in the morning, every night, December through March. Sub-zero cold. wind cutting through canvas coats, hands going numb on the reins of the sprinkler sled. The roads aren't flat. They follow the contour of the land, gentle grades uphill so the horses can pull, steep down slopes to let gravity and momentum do the work. Some roads are 10 miles long, winding through forest, across frozen creeks, over lakes. Every route is a calculated risk. The shortest path, the flattest ice. The loads keep getting heavier. The sleds themselves are masterpieces of frontier engineering. Massive oak runners, 8 inches wide, 12 feet long, shod with iron. The bunks, horizontal beams that hold the logs, are chained to the runners with grade 5 logging chain, each link thick as your thumb. You watch the loaders work at the rollways, where logs cut in the fall are stacked in huge piles waiting for snow. You grab a cant hook and help roll a pine log onto the sled. It's 3 feet across, 30 feet long, 1,800 pounds. You pull. The log shifts. You pray it doesn't roll back. A good load is 8 to 12 tons, enough to justify the haul, not enough to break the sled or kill the horses. But the foremen are under pressure. The company wants volume. Camp against camp, competing for the biggest hauls. Some loads push 20 tons, 30. By 1910, the record loads are hitting 40 tons or more. Pyramids of logs stacked so high, they block out the sky. The first deaths happen during loading. A chain slips, a log rolls. A man doesn't move fast enough. In a company ledger from a camp near Manistique, there's a single line: loader crushed beneath load. January 14. Paid to date. No name, no family notification. Just a deduction from the payroll. The logs kept moving. But getting them on the sled was the easy part. The horse teams were extraordinary. 6 to 8 horses for a standard load, 10 to 12 for the heavy hauls. Draft animals, percherons, Belgians, massive creatures weighing a ton each. You're a Teamster now. They call you a skinner. You hold the reins of 8 horses in your hands, controlling them with voice commands and leather lines. The horses are harnessed in pairs, each pair linked to the one in front, all of them connected to the sled tongue by a complex web of straps, chains, and doubletrees. You learn their names. You learn their temperaments. You learn to read fear in a horse's eyes, because when a horse panics, people die. The work is rhythmic. Dawn hitch up, midday haul, dusk unhitch. Your hands bleed from the cold and the friction of the reins. You sleep in the barn some nights because it's warmer than the bunkhouse and you need to be close to the animals. A Teamster's memoir from Wisconsin describes the sound. When the sled went over, you heard the horses scream before you heard the men. Harness failures were common. Leather cracks in extreme cold. A broken trace, the strap connecting the horse to the load, could send the entire rig into chaos. If the sled was on a downslope and the harness failed, the load would overrun the team. Horses trampled by 40 tons of logs and oak runners. Men caught trying to stop the runaway. There's an accident report from Marquette County, February 1908. Team overrun on Deer Lake grade. 4 horses destroyed. Driver survived. The driver quit the next day. The ice roads had grades. You learn to listen for that creak, the sound of ice flexing under weight, the groan of runners cutting into the frozen surface. Uphills were manageable. The horses pulled steadily. The load stayed controlled. Downhills were where physics took over. You'd crest a ridge and see the road falling away in front of you. A half-mile slope ending at a frozen creek or the edge of a lake. The sled would start to slide. Momentum would build, and you had seconds to decide whether to brake or let it run. The brake systems were primitive. Chain drags, heavy lengths of chain wrapped around the runners to create friction. Haywire stops, literally bales of hay thrown under the runners in emergencies. If you hit the brakes too hard, The horses couldn't hold the load and everything jackknifed. If you didn't brake enough, the sled would overrun the team and you'd have a runaway. Runaways killed more men than anything else in the early years of ice road logging. Some Teamsters developed a feel for it, an instinct for reading the grade, the ice conditions, the mood of the horses. They'd ride the brake just enough to keep control without fighting momentum. Others never learned. You'd see them white-knuckled on the reins, braking too early, too hard, turning a manageable descent into a crisis. The experienced drivers knew sometimes you had to let the sled run, trust the horses to keep ahead of the load, and pray the road stayed true. But even the best Teamsters couldn't account for hidden hazards. A snow-covered stump in the road, a patch of rough ice that grabbed the runners wrong, a sudden turn where the road had been straight the day before. Road crews constantly adjusted routes as conditions changed. One mistake and everything went sideways, literally. An accident report from Ontonagon, Michigan, January 1909, describes a sled going out of control on a grade called Devil's Drop. The Teamster tried to brake. The chain snapped. The sled accelerated. The horses bolted. The entire rig, 42 tons of logs and iron, left the road, went through the trees, and crashed into a ravine. 2 men were riding the load. Neither survived. The horses had to be shot where they lay. The Teamster lived. He never drove again. You pulled. You trusted. You prayed. The hidden killer wasn't the slopes. It was the lakes. Crossing a frozen lake was the fastest route between cutting sites and the river landings where logs would wait for spring drive. Lakes were flat, no grades, no tight turns through forest, just open ice and clean hauls. But ice is deceptive. 2 feet thick in one spot, 6 inches in another. Pressure ridges. Warm springs feeding in from below, variable snow cover affecting freeze depth. You couldn't see any of it. The road boss would drill test holes with an auger, checking thickness. But a test hole 50 feet from the trail meant nothing when you were running a 40-ton load down the center. The ice was alive, constantly shifting and settling, cracking and refreezing. Temperature swings created stress fractures invisible under snow. Current patterns beneath the surface thinned ice in unpredictable zones, and the loads kept getting heavier. You'd feel it before you saw it, a subtle flex in the ice beneath the sled runners, a barely perceptible give. The horses would sense it too, ears pinned back, steps becoming hesitant. Sometimes there was a sound, a low crack, almost subsonic, that you felt in your chest more than heard. Sometimes there wasn't. The ice would just open up. The physics of a breakthrough are brutal. Concentrated weight on narrow runners creates immense pressure per square inch. If the ice fails, it fails fast. The sled drops through. The horses go in. If you're riding the load, you go in too. Water temperature in January, 33 degrees. Survival time, minutes if you're lucky. Rescue, nearly impossible. The sled sinks, the logs scatter, the bodies stay down until spring thaw. They didn't always recover them. Some breakthroughs were catastrophic and instant, the ice giving way all at once, swallowing everything in seconds. Others were slow-motion disasters. The ice would sag, water seeping up around the runners, giving you just enough time to realize what was happening, but not enough time to do anything about it. Teamsters would try to whip the horses into a run, hoping momentum would carry them across the weak spot. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the acceleration was exactly what caused the final collapse. Records from camps around Lake Superior document dozens of breakthrough incidents between 1905 and 1915. Sleds, teams, men, gone through the ice and never seen again. In the company books, it was operational loss. To the families, it was everything. Back at camp, you count the missing. 3 men didn't come back from the lake haul. 1 loader was carried out on a makeshift stretcher. leg crushed between logs. The camp clerk updates the ledger. No compensation. If a man died, his family inherited his debt to the company store. If he was injured and couldn't work, he was sent out on the next supply sled heading to town, assuming he could survive the trip. Most couldn't. Gangrene set in fast in the cold. Infection was a death sentence. The evening routine became a grim accounting. You'd gather in the bunkhouse after dark, count who made it back, note who didn't. Sometimes a man would arrive hours late, half frozen, having walked back after his sled broke down or his team ran off. Sometimes men simply vanished, went out on a haul, and never returned. Search parties were rare. The forest was too vast, the weather too brutal, the work too pressing. If a man was missing for more than a day, he was written off. The camp blacksmith doubled as a surgeon when necessary. Amputations were performed on crude tables with whiskey for anesthetic and a saw meant for cutting wood. Frostbite was epidemic. Fingers, toes, ears, noses lost to the cold. You learned to check your extremities constantly, watching for the white patches that signaled tissue death. Once frostbite set in deep, there was no saving the flesh. Cut it off or watch it rot. Why did men stay? Because they had no choice. Immigrant labor, Finns and Swedes with limited English, desperate for any work, drifters running from debts or the law, young men who signed contracts without reading them, lured by the promise of good wages, not understanding that good wages meant nothing when you were paid in company scrip that was only valid at the company store. Everything cost more at the store. Tobacco, boots, gloves, medicine. You could work all winter and leave in March owing more than you earned. The companies knew this. Labor was replaceable. There were always more men willing to gamble their lives for the chance at wages. In Wisconsin's timber camps, the winter turnover rate was staggering. A camp would start the season with 200 men and end with 50 originals. The rest replaced 2 or 3 times over. As men died, were injured, or simply walked away into the forest and froze. How many times can you gamble before you lose? By 1910, the competition between camps had reached a fever pitch. Foremen were offered production bonuses. The camp that moved the most timber got preferential contracts the next season. Records were kept, publicized, broken. Newspapers ran stories about the largest loads, 48-ton haul on the Escanaba line. Record sled pulls 52 tons across Gogbik Lake. The numbers kept climbing. So did the death toll. You're loading beyond the sled's design limits now. The oak bunks are bowing under the weight. The chains are stretched to maximum tension. You stack logs higher than the sled was ever meant to carry. 25 feet high, 30 feet, a pyramid of timber that sways when the horses start to pull. Engineering tolerances don't exist out here. You load until someone says stop, and no one says stop. The mathematics were insane. A standard sled might be rated for 12 tons, but 12 tons didn't impress anyone. Didn't get you a bonus. Didn't get your camp's name in the newspaper. So you pushed it to 20, then 30, then 40. The sleds weren't built for it. The ice roads weren't maintained for it. The horses weren't bred for it. But the demand was there, and the pressure was relentless. Camp foremen walked the loading sites, shouting encouragement and threats in equal measure. One more log. Make it count. Show those bastards at Camp 7 what real men can move. Pride became part of the equation. Competition between crews within the same camp. Loaders trying to outdo the previous day's pyramid. The psychology of it was as dangerous as the physics. When the failures came, they came as cascades. A bunk would crack under load. The logs would shift. The entire pyramid would tip. The sled would go over sideways, spilling 40 tons of timber across the ice road. Horses would panic, tangling in their harnesses. Men would be caught in the avalanche of rolling logs. A newspaper account from Ironwood, Michigan, February 1911, describes a record load attempt that ended with 3 dead, 7 injured, and a sled destroyed. The camp superintendent's response: regrettable accident, operations continue. January and February were the killing months. Peak season, maximum loads, shortest days, exhausted men. Mortality spiked every winter, predictable as the snow. Midwinter thaws were disasters. A warm front would move through, temperatures climbing into the 30s, sometimes 40s. Rain would fall on the ice roads, melting the surface, turning the glaze into slush. The road monkeys would try to compensate, respraying at night, but you can't rebuild an ice road in the middle of the season. The damage was done. The surface degraded, ruts formed. The smooth glide turned into grinding friction. Underneath, worse things were happening. Rotten ice, solid looking on top, honeycomb weak underneath. Snow cover insulated the surface, preventing it from refreezing properly. Warm springs feeding into lakes would create pockets of thin ice invisible from above. You would be running a normal haul, everything feeling solid, and then the ice would give way. No warning, just the crack. Multiple accidents would happen simultaneously during thaw periods. One camp would lose a sled on Monday, another on Wednesday, a third on Friday. Labor Commission investigations, when they happened at all, would note the weather patterns, the increased risk, the lack of safety protocols. They would recommend temperature limits, load restrictions, better ice monitoring. The recommendations were filed and ignored. Workers developed dark humor as a survival mechanism. Songs about widowmakers, about ice that couldn't hold, about horses that went through. Gallows humor, sung in bunkhouses over whiskey smuggled in, against company rules. One Finnish song, roughly translated: "The ice road takes what it wants, the company takes the rest. We give our backs and our breath, and pray the spring comes fast." By March, the urgency became desperate. Ice out was coming. Once the lakes and rivers thawed, the entire winter's work had to be done. Logs had to be at the landing sites, ready for the spring drive. Camps pushed 18-hour days. You would hitch before dawn, run hauls until after dark, sleep 4 hours, and start again. The horses were breaking down. Men were breaking down. Everyone knew the ice was failing, but the work didn't stop. You make final runs knowing the ice is thin, knowing the temperature has been above freezing for 3 days straight. The sled groans beneath you. The horses are skittish, refusing to move at full speed. You can hear water moving under the ice, a rushing sound that shouldn't be there. But the logs need to move. The company needs its timber. You need your pay, so you go. Catastrophic accidents increased at season's end. In Ashland, Wisconsin, March 1912, a sled carrying 38 tons broke through ice on Chequamegon Bay. The entire rig, sled, logs, 8-horse team, 2 men, went down in water 40 feet deep. One survivor was pulled out by a rescue crew. He lasted 2 days before pneumonia killed him. His testimony, recorded by a county clerk, described the ice opening like a mouth and the sound of the horses drowning. He was 19 years old. Desperation versus survival instinct. Every spring. The same calculation. Every spring. The same losses. When the season ended, the camps closed. Supply sleds made final runs back to railheads. Men collected their pay, or what was left after company store deductions, and scattered. Some went back to families. Some drifted to the next camp, the next job. Some never left the forest. The casualty counts were estimates at best. In some Michigan and Wisconsin camps, by various reports, winter mortality could reach 5 to 10% in the hardest years. But those were the recorded deaths, men whose names made it into ledgers, whose bodies were recovered. Immigrant workers, drifters, men using false names to avoid debts or the law, disappeared into the statistics as unidentified or no record. Company ledgers would note operational losses without specifics. Mass graves were common. Frozen ground made individual burials impractical. Bodies were stored in sheds until spring thaw, then buried in collective plots near campsites. Most graves were unmarked. Some camps kept records, most didn't. A historical survey of logging camp cemeteries in Michigan's Upper Peninsula identified over 200 burial sites, the majority with no headstones, no markers, no names. In the company ledger, it was accidental death. To his widow, it was Tuesday. The ice road era didn't end because of safety concerns. It ended because technology changed. Narrow-gauge rail lines began penetrating deeper into timber country in the 1910s and 1920s. Rail was faster, more reliable, less weather-dependent. Logs could move year-round. The economics shifted. Ice roads became obsolete not because they were deadly, but because they were inefficient. The new systems brought new dangers. Locomotives derailed, cable systems snapped, men were still crushed, still killed, but the physics were different, the deaths were different. Progress, they called it. Workers' compensation laws started appearing in the 1910s. Safety inspections became mandatory in some states by the 1920s. Regulations on working hours, equipment standards, employer liability. The reforms came slowly, state by state, often after major disasters that couldn't be ignored. By the time meaningful protections existed, the ice road camps were already gone. The price had already been extracted. The forests are mostly gone now, cut over and replanted, or turned to farmland. The camps are ghost towns, collapsed bunkhouses, rusted equipment, foundations slowly disappearing into underbrush. Museums in Michigan and Wisconsin display artifacts, massive sled runners, logging chains, photographs of crews standing beside impossible loads of timber. Accident reports are archived in historical societies, yellowed pages documenting deaths in bureaucratic language. Drive through Michigan's Upper Peninsula today, and you'll pass through towns that once depended entirely on timber. Manistee, Munising, Escanaba. The mills are closed. The rail lines are abandoned or converted to tourist trains. Old logging roads have become hiking trails. The ice roads long since melted into memory. But the legacy remains. The wooden buildings in Chicago, the railroad ties that carried freight across the continent, the mine timbers that shored up shafts in Montana and Colorado. All of it came from somewhere. All of it was cut, loaded, and hauled by men whose names are mostly forgotten. In some cemetery corners, you can still find markers, simple wooden crosses, names weathered away, a few granite stones paid for by fraternal organizations or unions that formed too late to save the men who died before them. Most graves are unmarked. The forest has reclaimed them. When you see old-growth lumber in a historic building, wide pine boards, clear grain, no knots, remember where it came from. Remember the men who cut it, who loaded it, who drove it across frozen lakes in the dark. The ice road that groaned beneath 40 tons. The horses that screamed when the sled went over. The widows who inherited debt instead of compensation. The chain you wrapped around the logs at 4 a.m. The ice that cracked beneath your feet. The calculation you made every day. Risk versus survival. Profit versus life. The buildings stand. The railroads run. The names are unrecorded. What do you think? Was the cost worth it, or could we have done better? Share your thoughts below.